Good morning, good afternoon. We'll give it a few minutes for people to join. Then I can verify if you can hear me, and then we can get started. Give it a few minutes. Hopefully, we'll have some folks join this morning. Okay, good morning. Hello, good morning. All right, I am giving it a few minutes to hopefully allow others to join. It could be early where you're located. Thank you for joining. I am going to wait just a second. I also want to make sure my audio is clear. I'm trying my fancy headset, so hoping it's working this morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for being here. All right. It is 12:03 my time. I am going to give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. It might be a quick morning or afternoon session as I don't specifically have a topic to cover. But it will be open to answering questions. Oh, headset is working. Thank you. Hey, lady. Good morning. All right. Thank you for letting me know. I paid good money for this headset, and I never use it, so I figured I was going to try it today so I could get my money's worth. I'm glad you all can hear it. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started, hoping others will join so that you all can get some benefit out of this session because I don't have or really a specific topic to cover this morning. And so I'll do my kickoff and then we'll go ahead and get started. So good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are logging in from. My name is Jewel Pearson, and this is Miss Bohemian Soul TV. This is the Creating Home, a Tiny House series, and this segment is the What's Your Question portion of the segment. So every Sunday, I offer live content. I alternate between the conversation series and the What's Your Question series, where in the conversation series, I'm usually interviewing someone in and around the movement. So this morning, it is me answering frequently asked tiny house questions. So to give you a little background on me, I built what I consider a kind of fancy tiny house in 2015, and since that time, I have shared my journey to hopefully inspire others who are interested in the movement. I do also offer coaching and consultations to help people in their tiny house journey, and you can find links to schedule with me in the video description once this video goes live and all of my other videos. And along the way, I serve up a lot of representation. So that is one of the main things that I want to do here is to show us in this movement and to represent us in this movement. It is my intent to build figurative and literal community that is inclusive and also accessible. And so if you find this information and the video helpful, I hope you will like it. I hope you'll share it. I also hope you'll subscribe to the channel and then turn on the notification so that you'll know when content is available. So again, there are two segments in the series: Conversations on Intimate Spaces, which is the interviews with people in and around the tiny house movement. And then this is the What's Your Question segment, where I answer some of the frequently asked questions and share tips. And so this morning, I want to start off by saying thank you all very much for joining. This is the, let me do my technical stuff here and get back to the right screen. There we go. So I want to say thank you very much for being with me this morning, this afternoon, just depending on where you're located. I took a hiatus from the series, the segment, because and I kind of shared this last week. I lost, many of you knew my four-legged companion, Nina Simone, and I lost her back in July, and I kind of needed to, losing her was for me kind of the tip on what I have considered just a pile of grief. And so I needed to sit with that grief and kind of rethink and regroup. And so what I want to say outside of thank you all for the love that you showed me, thank you for showing back up now that I am relaunching this series. I appreciate you all bearing with me and then jumping back in and sending me love notes along the way to share that you missed the segment and hoped it was coming back. So that was really encouraging to me, and I really appreciate it. But I also want to encourage everyone to um, sit and honor and hold space for yourself as you're dealing with grief. Grief from loss, from death, grief from we experienced the pandemics, and so many things have changed since that time. What has been the norm is no longer the norm, and we're having to figure out what the new normal looks like. Our lives have changed. We're dealing with sickness. We're dealing with remnants of sickness. If you've had COVID and then you end up, with some long-term effects, and just trying to figure out what that looks like. There's been a lot of financial impact, and so it is even more important in these times to make sure that we are holding space for ourselves and being kind to ourselves and making sure that we are taking care of ourselves as we need to navigate through all of those things. So I appreciate again you all being here for me to allow me that opportunity to do what I needed to do. So I don't really have a topic this morning. This session is what I have been calling the kind of the free for all, where I answer questions, or open mic, I think is what I called it, where I just answer questions that are in the chat to help somebody that's in the journey that has some specific questions that I can answer. So let me see if there's something in the chat that I can speak to. Good morning. Thank you for joining, and thank you very much. Um, La, I don't want to screw up your name. Ladone, maybe. I don't want to mess it up, and if I did, I apologize. Are tiny homes only built in the U.S.? So no. When you think about it, tiny homes really aren't a new thing. If you travel and see other communities in other locations, they typically already live small. The U.S. I think is synonymous with the massive homes. People are generally used to living small, so I think that's oftentimes why people outside of the country are surprised that tiny homes are a big thing here, because it's something that they're used to. A lot of Caribbean countries are really focused on using containers, and they build tiny homes out of containers, and so it's really not something new. The thing that is newer here are the tiny houses on wheels. That is something that's a little bit new, but the concept of tiny living and tiny homes really isn't new, and tiny homes are definitely built outside of the United States. This might be a quick one. I will encourage you. So I know that I've had quite a few questions in my chat over the last few weeks with questions, and I want to encourage you. There are seven, I think, series in the What's Your Question segment that I recorded last year. The first session was how to get started. So if you have questions about getting started in the movement, it can be daunting. I did cover that. That was the very first session that I covered. My second session was how to get out of your own way, because one of the things that I find in a lot of the consultations um, that I have is really people are stuck in their own head. And that applies to any type of project where you're stuck in your own head and you really can't get out of your own way to see whatever it is that you're trying to achieve through. So I talk about that. A lot of times people are in their head because, they shared their dream with someone, and someone say, that's not smart, or that's stupid, or I don't know why you want to do that. And then we oftentimes will let people throw us off of something that we were interested in doing. So I talk a lot about that, and I think that's really key to um, anything that you want to pursue is figuring out and getting out of your head and not listening to the naysayers, or maybe sharing your dreams with other people, because if it's your dream, it may not resonate with others. So you want to definitely check into that video if you find yourself kind of stuck and not knowing how to get started. And a lot of it is, the dauntingness of whatever it is you're trying to do. My third segment, I talked about where to place a tiny house. So that is always that's the number one question. Where can I place a tiny house? And as I'm talking about tiny houses, I am speaking to tiny houses on wheels. And so I talk about placement, locations, and I also specifically talk about placement and the challenges for. So where can I place a tiny house is the number one question for tiny house dwellers, period. And then there's the where can I place a tiny house and ensure I'm also safe as a Black person, as a person of color. And so I spoke to that in segment 3. So if those are some of your questions, you can check that out. And not to say that you can't ask some of those questions this morning, but I just want to kind of give you background on what we've talked about previously. Segment 4 in the What's Your Question series was about design, how to figure out what your design is, what your design style is, and then how to move forward from there. There was the segment after that was on locating build sponsors. I did have some build sponsors. When I built my house in 2015, I did reach out to build sponsors to have them sponsor some of the materials in my build, some of the products in my build, and I talk about how I did that and give you some tips on that. And then the next series after that was talking about tiny house pros and cons. I don't really have a lot of cons, but I talk about the pros and cons and answered some questions that people asked specifically around pros and cons. And then the segment after that was questions specifically about my house. I often get a lot of questions about the square footage, different things about my house. So I answered those questions. And then there were a couple of open mic series where I answered the questions that came through in the chat. So if you have some specific questions around those subjects, please be sure to check those series out. And then again, if you have a question while you're on this morning, I am happy to answer their question. So let me check in the chat again. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Let's see. How do you locate a tiny home community? So really, you can Google it. I have a link of some communities that I'm familiar with that I can share in the description. Let me make a note so I won't forget to do that. But Googling tiny house communities will net you a lot of information. Um, I'll share my link of the communities that I'm familiar with. There are some communities, there are not a lot of tiny house communities. I always share that the West Coast is doing a better job at tiny houses on wheels specifically than the East Coast is. And when I say that, around acceptance and legalization and allowing them. So there are several cities in California that allow tiny houses as accessory dwelling units. And this is, again, tiny houses on wheels, so you can have it as an accessory dwelling unit in someone's backyard. They potentially will allow it as a separate dwelling on a piece of property as a standalone. And they're really focused on dealing with their affordable housing crisis and providing housing for the unhoused. And they're really leading the way, and I'm hoping that that will kind of catch on throughout the rest of the country. Maine is also an area that is very friendly to tiny houses. So Google will provide you some of those answers. And again, doing your research, because I always speak to the representation that I want to provide here. Also ensuring that you're, asking some questions about safety as a person of color, a black person, if that is your journey, so that you can also be aware of that. Um, have I ever used my tiny house as an Airbnb? I have. I There was a point in between where I didn't feel safe in my home in the location where it was, and I had gotten an apartment as I was looking for a new location to relocate. And my tiny house, I used it as an Airbnb for probably about 6 months. I would absolutely say it was lucrative. Great feedback. Everyone enjoyed staying in my house. It absolutely was not my intent to Airbnb my house, and so that was not the direction I wanted to go in, but it was a decision that was made from a financial perspective, because now I'm paying for an apartment as well as the space where my house was located until I had the opportunity to relocate it. So I needed it from a financial standpoint, but because that is my home and I adore it, that's not something I would do again. But there are a lot of tiny houses on Airbnb. It is something that I've got friends who do it. It is a great opportunity if you can, if it works for you to Airbnb a tiny house, or if you want the experience of living in a tiny house, there's always opportunity there. All right. Thank you for that question. All right. Next question. What is your feeling on bedroom placement in your tiny home? I'm thinking about one on ground level would make sense in my forever home. Absolutely. And that's what I talk about in design. Kind of figuring out what makes sense for you and what works best for you, what your preference is. Um, there are several designs with a tiny the bedroom on the first floor. When I built my home in 2015, that wasn't something that you saw a lot of. The loft, overhead loft bedroom was more prominent then. And you're doing that because, from a space saving. So your bedroom is up above so that you have the bottom floor for more livable space. But depending on age and, the interest specific to your requirements for your design, that is absolutely an option to design a bedroom on the ground level. For me, one of the considerations I made when building, having my loft overhead, is I definitely wanted stairs and not a ladder, because I knew that wasn't sustainable for me, and definitely not as you're getting older to deal with a ladder. So that was one of my requirements that went into my design. Um, but now, as I look forward and as I'm getting older, the sunroom space that I've added to my home, I've considered that at some point that would likely become a bedroom space for me, so that I could have a first floor bedroom. But it is certainly doable. In design, I talk about the start for the design of your house. You should have a list of your must-haves, your nice-to-haves, and then your wish list. And if having your bedroom on the ground level is a must-have, then you need to have that on your list before you start really even going into design, talking to a builder, et cetera, understanding the things that you have to have in your home so that it can be sustainable for you. And I've always said, knowing the things that I had to have in my home and knowing myself how I needed to move around a space and ensuring that was included in my design is how I've been successful. I've been in my home, this May will be 8 years. So that is exactly how I've been successful in designing my home specifically for me and my needs. So absolutely, that's an option. Okay, so the next question. I've heard you express the challenges in finding a safe space for your home. Would you say find land first and then build the home? No apologies needed. So I would offer you to watch the placement video to talk so you can get into the details of the challenges with. And again, I'm talking to tiny houses on wheels. Most locations, they are not allowed, specifically not allowed as the sole structure on a piece of property. So when you say finding land, um, depending on where you're looking for land, that still may not be an option. Finding land first. Um, I am successful because I am on property, on farm property, and I am connected to utilities from existing structures on that property. My home is not the only structure on that property. If I were to try to go buy land and place my tiny house on property as the sole structure, that would never happen right now in North Carolina. So understand where you're trying to locate, understand what the rules are around a tiny house. Now, if you're building on a foundation, that is a totally different conversation. Yes, you can build on land on foundation and build a small home. That's a different conversation. But I'm specifically talking about tiny houses on wheels. So when you say find the land first, if you're talking about a tiny house on wheels, that looks like going finding either property that already has existing structures and you're buying that property and you intend to place a tiny house, say, in the backyard of that property, of the existing structures. But what that looks like is you're kind of doing it, as we say, under the radar. You're not asking for permission for doing that. And that kind of depends on, how your temperature for doing stuff under the radar. So, kind of to answer your question, the land, where the land is located and whether it is allowable is really going to be the first question. Was of the opinion that I would build my house and then I knew I would find a location to place it. Everybody's not willing to take that risk. So um, it, it it's still, I always say, and I also say tiny house living isn't for the faint of heart at this point because you're not going to find land that you can specifically place a tiny house on as a sole structure. There's going to have to already be an existing structure there because you'll need to get power and water for your tiny house from those existing structures. The city, county, they're not going to provide you those services for a tiny house on wheels. And I know this was like a long way around answering your question, but I hope you understand why we had to go the long way so you can be clear that finding the land isn't as easy as let me find the land first and then I'm going to build this home if you're talking about a tiny house on wheels. I'm fascinated by, here's another question. Thank you. And Felicia, if you still have some questions there, please feel free to ask again. I'm fascinated by renting land from black farmers. Please riff on this if you can. So you're speaking to the what I kind of consider the program where collective communities. And what I've been trying to do is, and I give the background, and I can provide the link in the just video description. So what I have been trying to do is connect black and brown tiny house owners with black and brown farmers. Background is that black and brown farmers, I just read an article about black farmers losing land before I started this live. Black farmers are losing their land at astronomical numbers. A lot of it has to do with fraud, racism, all of the things that keep us out of housing are some of the same things that farmers are dealing with. I just saw something about how they were purposely not provided access to loans that other farmers were provided access to. So that has been ongoing since the beginning of time, basically, where it's the stealing of land, and it's not like black farmers are losing their land by their own choice. So really, if you want to call it what it is, it's call it land is being stolen. And so that is what's happening. And so my idea has been to pair black and brown tiny house owners with the opportunity to rent land, and it is not buying land from them. I'm not trying to take their land. It is to rent a place on a farm so that you financially are paying them rent, which helps them financially. You might also be interested in helping them on the farm, so you're providing assistance and labor. And then for you, it is a safe space because you're on this black farm and you know that you have a safe space. Again, this is still under the radar. This is not legalized. This is not you own this property. This is renting a parking place for your tiny house. And so I will provide the link that I for the forms that I ask people to complete for either a landowner, a farm owner, or a tiny house owner. The thing is, and this is what people end up getting frustrated about, is a farmer's job, his first job is to be a farmer. So if you already aren't within 2 or 3 months of completing your tiny house, I am not going to connect you with the farmer to go through navigating conversations. Can you hold a space? I'm not doing that. And that is where people get frustrated and they say, well, I can't build my house if I don't know that I have a place to put it. Again, the farmer's main job is to farm. I am only making these connections if you're already in the process of building your tiny house. And it's kind of, again, it's that risk. And I always say, again, tiny houses aren't for the faint of heart. It is taking that risk, building your house, trusting that you will find a location. And I understand what trusting looks like. I always say I've been able to do this for 8 years, but my journey, my experience, the risk that I'm willing to take isn't, the same for everyone. But I do want people to understand it is not it is not I want to build in 2 years and I'm going to connect you with some farmers to have a conversation with. It is I'm building. I'm 2, 3 months max away from completing my tiny house, and now I'd like to have a conversation with farmers. And so filling out the form, I send out information to share where potential the cities that we have potential locations in. But again, I will not make specific connections if you aren't at the place where it is time for those communications to happen. So I hope that helps answer the question. Um, Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for me. You may have answered this already, but if you could go back, what, if anything, would you do differently? Um, I kind of spoke to this a minute ago. There was a lot of, I am a project manager that has been the way I've worked for many years. That's the way my brain works. Fortunately for me, I utilized that in the planning and the research that went into place before I actually built my home. And so that where I said having the list of must-haves, nice to have, in the wish list, I used that in building my home, thoroughly researched. I was on site every single day for my tiny house build. And so the success of my tiny house build is all of that work that went into it in advance. So there is nothing that, thankfully, there is nothing that I would have done differently in the build of my home. Um, um, on the hindsight, maybe the I'm not gonna nothing. I'm not gonna say that. I don't. It's 8 years in. I'm not gonna drag that back up. My build was challenging with my builder for various reasons. So I'm not gonna throw anybody under the bus. What I will say is my home is. I've not had any regrets on anything with my home. The thing that I think that I've spoken to that I would have done differently is trusting myself and knowing that because everything was new, everything was scary, the challenges that I had with my builder added a major stress to everything that I was doing that was new and uncomfortable. Um, the only thing that I would have done differently is trust myself and know that I knew exactly what I knew. And I've spoken to this before in that how building is such a very male dominated profession, and I still have building contractors, all of that, plumbers, all of those things that go into building a tiny house, a very male dominated profession. And oftentimes that becomes a big challenge as a woman in dealing in that profession. And again, I still have that same challenge where I'll have something going on with the house and I know exactly how it needs to be fixed or exactly what needs to be done. And but I can't physically do the work. And I still have to go through a contractor telling me, oh, it can't be done that way or it shouldn't be done that way. it is absolutely can be done that way, and this is the way to do it. I just need you to do the work. And so pushing through and knowing that I knew exactly what I knew and trusting myself that it was going to be just fine and as I imagined would probably be the only thing that I'd done differently. I would do differently because my home, um, I adore it. The extensions that I've added have just been because, I have the space, but there's nothing about the core of my tiny house that I'd need to do differently. Um, this question I think is very similar to the question I just answered. Would it be wise to purchase land for building a tiny house? And if so, what questions need to be asked of terms of what's allowed on the property? Again, so I'm always talking about tiny houses on wheels, but for land, for what is allowed on property, that is determined by zoning and building code enforcement. Those decisions are made at city and county levels. It's not made at a state level. So what's allowed on the property is going to be determined by how that property is zoned. And so you'll then deal with the the city county officials to understand the rules and requirements. Most times tiny houses on wheels are not allowed. They may already have some rules that say no, they're not allowed because oftentimes these areas think of tiny houses on wheels as RVs. And so they already have rules that say you cannot live in an RV full time. If they don't have rules, and this is more of the big cities, the challenge is they're chasing big dollars. Tiny houses don't bring in big dollars, so they're really not trying to hear your conversation. And and I can say that because I've tried to be in conversation with Charlotte for many years about it, and they're really not trying to hear the conversation. But in smaller rural areas, that if they don't already have rules about it, and even if they do, sometimes it's worth having a conversation. Hey, can I make an appointment and come present this proposal to you, and go through the steps of what it is that you would like to do and have that conversation. Oftentimes, you can change minds in smaller areas where people are, they're not really thinking outside of the box. And so you're presenting an opportunity to them that they may not have considered. So I'm not saying don't don't attempt it, but just understand it's not just as simple as I'm going to buy this piece of property and I'm going to place my tiny house on wheels on it, and I feel like I can do that because I own this property. It unfortunately does not work that way. Oh, and now I see that you said I answered your question. So I did expand a little bit on it. Thank you. Um, good good morning, good afternoon. Um, Here's a question. How do I find land available for rent in the Huntersville or Charlotte area for a tiny house? Okay, so again, we're talking about tiny houses on wheels. Again, you're understanding that tiny houses on wheels are not technically allowed. And you're understanding that to live in a tiny house in the Huntersville or Charlotte area, it would be under the radar. And so, with all of those disclaimers out of the way that I have found places for locations for my tiny house, and I'm also going to refer you to, I think it was session 3, where to place a tiny house. I do talk about this in detail, so you can get more information there. But I have, word of mouth was a big one for me. There are also some Facebook groups, and I think I list them there that where people have property and they advertise it. But my main thing outside, my main way of finding locations outside of word of mouth was through Craigslist. And I put an ad on Craigslist. My very first location after having to move out of the RV park was a person that I found on Craigslist, and I put an ad on Craigslist. I put a couple of pictures of my tiny house, gave some, and said that I was looking for parking. Now, consider that I was kind of ahead of the game, so there was a lot of conversation, weirdness. People didn't understand what I was asking them when I would say I'm looking for a place for parking for my tiny house. But now we're here, and tiny houses are, a household word. So an ad on Craigslist to say I'm looking for a place for to rent for tiny house parking. And so that looks like somebody who has property, definitely not property in an HOA. You will be there a whole 15 minutes before somebody's at the door saying you've got to go. So a property that is not an HOA, a property that is has some seclusion, trees, a large enough backyard, obviously to accommodate the tiny house. But tree cover so that everybody going down the street can't see that there's a tiny house back there. Some privacy. You don't want somebody who has problems with their next door neighbors, because as soon as you get in there and the next door neighbors have seen it, they're calling the folks and telling on you. So you want to, ask all of those questions, but and surveying the locations. But that is how I found my location. So I put my ad in all of the sections of the tiny of Craigslist, because somebody going on looking to buy some lawn equipment might have some land. If they see your ad there in the lawn equipment, they might be interested. Somebody who is a farmer and they've got farming sections might see your ad. So I place my ad on all of the sections in Craigslist and just give them some background of, the width height of my house, what I need from an electrical perspective, water. I don't need sewage. A little bit of detail about myself. I'm willing to pay rent. I work from home. A little bit of background so that people understand what it is that you're asking, because the draw for them is that you're going to be providing them with some income. And so, and that is how I've been the most successful, is through Craigslist. And again, check out video 3 of where to place a tiny house. All right, so I've got somebody in here being goofy. When I close my eyes, I can't really see anything. Let me put this person out. All right, thank you. Tanya, I'm not sure. You're very welcome, Cynthia. Sorry, I do not know how okay, I'm not gonna kick you out yet. I'm not sure if that's spam. All right, let me see if uh, there's some more questions that I can answer. This is your time to ask a question if you have a question that I've not answered, or um, I don't see any more questions that I haven't answered. I don't know if y'all can hear my phone vibrating. Um, Folks don't know to put on their calendar that I'm talking to y'all at this time, and they're trying to text me. All right, I don't see any more questions in the chat that I can answer, and I don't want to not give people an opportunity to ask a question. I am going to refer you to some of the other videos. I've answered a lot of questions, and I will continue to answer questions as I can. This is the free time that I answer questions. I do offer consultations. Oh wow, one-on-one consultation. So a quick 30-minute chat, or I offer a 90-minute session where we can answer your questions one-on-one. Um, do banks finance tiny houses? What states? No, not the typical banks. I can provide a link to some financing options in the video. Let me make the video description. I'll provide a link. There are a few banks that offer financing for tiny houses. It's more of like a personal loan. If you work with a builder that is considered an RVIA builder, and that is a certification, a designation associated with building RVs. So they've gone through some training, and they've got this designation. If you work with a builder that is RBIA certified, then you can get an RV loan for that home, and those RV loans are typically provided through credit union. So your credit union, or it's also very likely that the tiny house builder is going to have some relationships with some banks that offer RV loans. So you can get financing that way, but most of the banks right now are not offering loans for tiny houses, and I'm sure it has something to do with the fact that they aren't stationary, and so there's the risk involved for them if it is a mobile unit and they provide a loan and you have the ability to move it. So that is a lot of the concern. But there are a few, and again, I'll provide the link and some information in the video description. Do you provide a list of builders? I can provide a list of the builders that I am familiar with and recommend. I'll provide that in the video description as well. I don't, my list is not all exhaustive of the great builders that are out there. This is just the few builders that I'm personally familiar with. Um, when I talk about um, how to get started, the first video, I do talk about selecting a builder and doing your due diligence. That's important. There are tiny houses that you can buy off of Craigslist right now. You can go to YouTube. I mean, not to YouTube. You can go to Facebook Marketplace right now and buy a tiny house from somebody on Facebook Marketplace. The challenge is you don't know how they built that house, and the house could look good from the outside and have all types of structural problems. So my recommendation is not to buy a tiny house that way because there's a major risk involved in doing so, unless that person can provide you with video and all the documentation of how the house was attached to the trailer, the way it was physically attached to the trailer, because that house has to move. And so if it was not attached properly, then you can lose the house if it's not attached properly to the trailer. How it was insulated. There's so many questions that you should be asking of someone that is building tiny houses to ensure it's structurally sound. And so my recommendation is to work with a legitimate tiny house builder. And when I say legitimate, it's not their first house they built. It's maybe not their fifth house that they've built. They're building tiny houses. They can provide you references of people that they've worked with, people that have lived in their houses for a period of time, so that you can understand what the build process was working with them, how it was working with them, how the house is holding up now structurally, and then if they had any issues, what it was like working to get the issues resolved post their build. You want to do all of that due diligence, and not just one person, several people, two, three, four people that they can provide you as references to ensure that you are working with a sound builder. And then I lost my thought. Oh, and then my other thing is, if you oftentimes people will say, well, my uncle says he's a contractor, he can build a tiny house. I always caution people in doing something like that as well, because you're building a tiny house on a trailer, on a moving foundation. That is totally different from building on foundation. And contractors all say they can do all of the things, but that is not always the case. So my recommendation is oftentimes to work with a tiny house builder and have them build I've lost my word, but build um, I can't, I've completely lost my word, but build your house to dry in is what we call it, so that they're building it on the trailer. They're doing all of the key things for you that are the challenge, because they have the expertise, and then you take it from that point and finish it. And you could have them just do the structure. You could have them run the electricity, have them run the plumbing, and then you finish it. And so they are not completing the entire build. They're getting you to a point where you can then take it and know that the home is structurally sound, and then you complete it. And I cannot think of my word that I know the proper building term, but hopefully that makes sense to you. Um, it's a question. Let's see. There's a tiny house builder in Alabama that I love their style, but do you think it's worth the long haul to a different state price wise? It depends. It's going to depend on the price of the house versus what you could provide, what you might be able to find locally, and then also the transportation. I do have a company that I work with for transportation that has moved my house. I've also recommended them to several people, um, and they tend to be less expensive than other places, and they do great transportation. I hate to add their name because I've reached out to them and asked them, can y'all offer $10 for referrals? And they've said no, and I've referred quite a few people to them. So I'm kind of stuck here, but I will want to look out for you all. So I will provide their name in my video description, even though they're cheap and don't provide any type of referrals. So I would say do the research to determine, the cost of the house and then get an estimate of what it would cost to transport from Alabama to your location. And that will help you decide if it is worth it. From a price perspective. People do that all the time. Moving a tiny house across the state is nothing really new. And sometimes it is really beneficial that you find a builder who in one state and their prices are a lot less than what you might find in your area, and it then can be worth it. But you got to do your research, and I'll add that information in the description. I would like to convert a shed on foundation into a tiny house. Which states will let you do this? Okay, so I'm going back to where I stated before. So the rules are decided at the city and county level, not at a state level. And so you'll have to find the rules out at that specific city, that specific county. Um, Shed to tiny house, a shed on foundation. Um, the rules vary for what's allowed there. Like you can put a shed on a piece of property. Most of the time, they have rules around whether you can actually live in that shed, and the answer is no. They will say, you can put a shed on a property for, housing supplies, but to live on it, absolutely no. So you're going to have to ask at the local level, the city and county level, what the rules are. They likely have some rules around the sizing of the shed because at some point, again, they know that people are trying to live in sheds, and so they have rules that you can that they'll only allow you to put up to such amount of square footage because then they're discouraging you from living in it, or they won't allow you to have plumbing run to the tiny house because they know again that means you're going to live in it. So you'll have to ask at that level now, at the city and county level. Um, but again, this is kind of like the conversation with a tiny house on wheel. If you're planning to do this under the radar, then it would be a matter of putting it on property where there's already an existing structure, and so you would then place this shed on this property under the radar. I'm not encouraging anybody to do anything illegal. I'm just giving you some options. And then you would tap off of existing power and water of structures that are already on the property. So it just depends on the route that you're trying to go, but you would have to ask at the city and county level. And most of the time, a shed to foundation conversion is not necessarily allowed, just like tiny houses on wheels. There are some challenges there. Um, what Facebook groups do you recommend for us to join as people of color and for a positive information learning environment? So there is I think it's called the Black Tiny House Movement. That's the only group that I know that is specifically for Black people and people of color. And most of the people in that group are still learning. I'm probably there are a few of us who actually live in houses and tiny houses and have been around for a while. So we're answering questions in there. all of the other groups that I know of are white-led groups, so you have to, it's a lot of good information provided that is necessary for tiny houses and tiny house living. But you also have to know, you have to deal with those with the filter of I'm a black person. How does this apply to me? Is this different? Is my journey going to be different? And use that information. So I'm in all of those groups, and I take from them what I can get from them. But the Black Tiny House movement is the only black group that I specifically know of. Tiny House Trailblazers, my Facebook page. I don't have a group, but I do share information specific to us on that page. Um, oh, you're very welcome, Terry. I'm glad to be able to provide that representation and help us in this movement. Did any of y'all? I was on the Weather Channel a little while ago, about an hour or so. Did anybody see the Weather Channel? I'm going to share that information. But I had an opportunity to talk about tiny houses and tiny houses from the perspective of Black people and people of color, along with a friend of mine, Ediaka. And so in Ediaka, we were in conversation last Sunday. So we were on the Weather Channel this morning. All right. I think I've answered all of the questions in the chat. I don't have any more questions that I can answer. Oh, thank you, Donna. I I'm in Atlanta this weekend, which is the hotel room that you see behind me, and I got it at a little. I've had it for a while, but I got it at my little favorite boutique spot here, and I'm gonna have to swing by and see what she has today. All right, I don't have anything else. I don't see any more questions being dropped. I have a list of things that I am going to drop in the description of this video to help answer additional questions. Y'all give me some time. It probably won't be until later this afternoon that I get to drop it because I do want to get out and enjoy some of the city. So I will be dropping the links, but it'll be later this afternoon. Um, so yeah, I didn't have anything else on my list. Hey, girly, how you doing? Good to see you. Um, Thank you for joining. I appreciate you. Tashay joined, and so we did an interview. So last week she lives in a tiny house community, a black woman. And so check out. I don't know which episode it is right now, but the conversations on intimate spaces. Check out her interview. You should be watching all of them anyway. So check out her interview. Good to see you. Let's see. Do I know about Texas tiny house communities? I'm not sure. My list includes Texas, but again, I'll drop that link in the video description. And I did share earlier just a Google tiny house communities, and if you put tiny house communities in Texas, sometimes you'll see stuff pop up. And it's always don't take my link as the end all and be all because there are oftentimes new communities happening. So you want to do a Google to get the most recent information. All right. Oh, you're very welcome, Felicia. Thank you. Thank you all very much for joining me. I appreciate you all. It's always, thank you. I enjoy spending time with y'all. I'm happy to be back. And again, I thank you all for coming back and joining and being excited that this is happening again. I appreciate you all. I am excited that I get to spend my Sundays with you all. So I am going to do my little close out at the end, and I am going to be back next Sunday. So with same bat time, same bat channel. Y'all know I'm old, so Batman was all the things. So it is, this is the Creating Home a Tiny House series. And there are two segments in the series. The What's Your Question, which is what we just went through, answering questions, the frequently asked questions and sharing tips for people in the journey. And then next Sunday, I will be back for the conversations on intimate spaces. And I've got a very nice interview lined up that I am looking forward to. Thank you so much, Donna. I appreciate that, and I received that. Um, Conversations on intimate spaces. So those are the interviews with people in and around the tiny house movement. New and live content is available each Sunday at 12 p.m. I love you more. At 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I ask that you, if this video was helpful to you, that you like it, you share it, tell your friends about it, get them to subscribe. Kim, you trying to make me cry. Get them to subscribe to the channel. Be sure that you're subscribed to the channel so that, and turn on the notifications so that you know when new content is available. Thank you, Kim. I miss Nina. I think I shared last Sunday. I do miss Nina, and that's why I was absent and needed to sit with that grief. I do have a new four-legged friend. Her name is Brooklyn Simone. She is Nina's granddaughter, and sis is a trip. She's nothing like Nina. She has been clear from the start. Don't get it twisted. She is her own little four-legged thing, and she is giving me a run for my money. So y'all pray for us because little sis is she's running things and she's driving me insane, but we're gonna make it work. So thank you very much. Thank y'all for the love. I will see you all next Sunday. Have a great Sunday and take care.